Hey there everyone, LoneWolf360 here back again for another video. So if there's one thing which I have to sadly admit to, it has to be the fact that when it came to last Halloween and my Dead Space upload, I'm gonna be completely honest here when I say this, but that video came off as very scuffed and rarely rushed. So today's video is going to be a bit different. Not only because I'm actually remaking one of my older videos, which I never really usually do, but on top of that, I'm going to be going a bit more in depth about why I personally love the first Dead Space game, while also talking about the other ones here and there. So of course, let us get into the video. So just for a bit of context for those that have no idea about what the hell Dead Space is an action horror survival series that originally started in 2008. Created by Visceral Games and published by EA, the games came off as a huge success and even got compared to the Aliens franchise, with the first one being pretty good, the second one even being better with the emphasis on action, and then the third one being, well, a very subjective manner. But of course, today we're going to be talking about the first game and what makes it so special. So when it comes to the first Dead Space game, I think many people can agree with the fact that this game holds up well despite being an Xbox 360/PS3 game, and that's mainly due to a couple of reasons. The environments and the general atmosphere of the game is stellar. The combat and the general vibes of this game always have you on your toes, and the story is pretty intriguing despite it being pretty basic. But of course, let me start off with the general environment and world building. So if there's one thing which I think many people can agree on, it has to be the fact that Dead Space really isn't all that much of a pretty game. And while you could say that most games are trying to go for realism of a generally dull and grayed out color palette, in Dead Space it actually makes a lot of sense once you pay attention to the details. Because in Dead Space, the Ishimura isn't some fancy top-of-the-line spaceship with all these nice bells and whistles. It's an old shipbreaker that's literally on its last legs and is about to be put out of service. So it being a generally grayed out and rusty looking environment makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, I feel like when it came to Visceral Games and the way about how they made a lot of work with their designs, I like how they made stuff futuristic but very practical per se. Like for example with Isaac's suit. So when it comes to Isaac's suit, I think many people can agree with the fact that despite it being pretty iconic, that it's not necessarily action hero material. Because Isaac Clarke isn't exactly Master Chief. He's fighting aliens, but he's not the type of badass superhero that could just fight whole ass armies. He's just a normal guy scavenging to get whatever he can in order to survive. And then there's also the little neat gameplay aspect to his suit, which is the fact that everything about it always keeps you within the experience. Like the health bar on his back, which always tells you about his health and the oxygen, along with your stasis, along with other things like the fact that whenever you go into your inventory, have to look into the map, or even do things like talk to other members of your team. You're never taken out of the experience because all these things are just naturally built within the suit. Unless you pause the game like a little bitch like me, to where you're just taken out of the experience of its entirety, and then the world just pauses. But of course, there's some other things which I want to touch on with the world building. Like the fact that Isaac doesn't really use guns per se, and uses tools that are deadly enough to be guns. Which, once again, kind of has like a real life aspect to it. Because realistically, in the future, you're going to have something that's pretty dangerous in order to cut a person in pieces, and Isaac uses what he already has in order to cut all the necromorphs into pieces, no matter how big nor small they may be. But of course, let us move on to the gameplay. So Dead Space and its base gameplay is really nothing to write home about, mainly due to the fact that it's the simple process of going from point A to point B to point C, killing a bunch of necromorphs, and also fixing stuff along the way because, well, Isaac is an engineer. But while the base gameplay is pretty simple when you summarize it like that, the real stars of Dead Space aren't just Isaac himself, but the necromorphs. So the necromorphs that you meet throughout all the Dead Space games come in all shapes and sizes, from something as simple as a slasher to something as big and terrifying as the Brute or the tormentor. It's pretty crazy to realize that at some point these things used to be human, and if I were to try to compare them to any other video game zombie, I say they're kind of similar to the Flood, but if the Flood were actually scary because you're not playing as a super soldier, you're just playing as some normal guy which just has to go deal with it. But of course, let us talk about how you fight the Necromorphs and what makes them so different compared to other video game zombies. So as I mentioned earlier, Isaac doesn't really use weapons in the Dead Space games. He uses tools which are just ever so dangerous enough to be weapons at the same time. The thing about the Necromorphs is that they can't be taken down like normal zombies. Instead, the Necromorphs need to be taken down by shooting off each and every one of their limbs, which depending on which one you're fighting and how many are thrown at you at the same time can either be easy or can just be complete bullshit. I remember throughout Dead Space 1, 2, and 3 about how there would be certain moments where the game was easy, and then certain moments where it kind of felt like the game was bullshit, and mainly due to how many the game would throw at you at the same time. See, because different Necromorphs take different damage depending on which weapon you're using and how much range you have, and I'm telling you man, the management in this game can rather be a good thing or a bad thing. But it's not impossible, and I feel like despite this game being pretty challenging, anyone can pretty much beat this game. But then there's also those special Necromorphs like the Regenerator, the Twitchers, and a few other gimmicky ones which I'll probably edit in later, along with the other ones which are just plain creepy because they're part of the environment. Like these ones which are like half bodies and which are part of the wall and start screaming from out of nowhere, or these ones that sit in a corner and put pathogens in the air so you need to go use an oxygen tank, or even the ones which are like literally part of the walls and start throwing tentacles at you just because, and that's how it is. The creepiest thing about the Necromorphs by far has to be the realization that every single one of these things at some point used to be human. No matter how big nor small, the small details that you can notice when you look at their bodies and which you can see like human flesh and skeletons all sharpened and whatnot is pretty damn menacing, and it really tells you about how creative the marker can be. But of course, let me move on to the story. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here when it comes to the story, in which I just have to say, it's honestly very forgettable. Not to say that it's bad per se, but I just didn't really care for a lot of the things that were going on outside of Hammond, which was like the most chill dude throughout the game. But pretty much, to make a long story short, Isaac Clarke is an engineer. He volunteered to go on an expedition to find out about what the hell happened to the Ishimura. Not only to help fix the ship, because well, as I mentioned before, he's an engineer, but also to find out about what the hell happened to his girlfriend because, well, she was on that ship too, and just like everything else, things went silent in a pretty mysterious way. So you start with a team of 5, but end with a team of 3 after a Necromorph attack, with the only survivors being you, which is Isaac, Hammond, and Kendra. But the Necromorphs aren't the only problem of the ship, as multiple systems across the Ishimura are failing, which really isn't all that surprising considering the current situation. So as most video games go, because Isaac is the main character, he needs to go track through the Ishimura to go kill a bunch of Necromorphs and also help fix the ship. But along the way he bumps into some random asshole, which is like some religious nut which tries to kill you multiple times with the Regenerator, which is kind of odd because this whole thing is about, it was about evolving humanity and whatnot, and I'm just like, my brother in Christ, you were sitting here on this creepy ass spaceship all by yourself and with like, I don't know, the 3 other people that survived on this thing, and now you're just deciding to go mess with me instead of just becoming another Necromorph, which I could just get rid of. But, of course, let me continue. So that guy tries to kill you a couple of times, your friend Kendra and Hammond try to talk to you throughout the game. There's also this thing about you trying to call for help, but having an entire spaceship crash into the Ishimura. Hammond unfortunately dies along the way at some point in the story, and then Kendra and you are the only ones alive, until some other guy randomly pops up from out of nowhere and tries to help us, and then he dies. Kendra leaves us for dead, and then our girlfriend Nicole pops up from out of nowhere, which leads to a twist which is kind of obvious. So we start messing with the marker, bring it down to the plant which it came from, kill a bunch of other necromorphs, and then Kendra comes out of nowhere to try and take the marker again. But she also tells us that her girlfriend, which is dead, which in all honesty is, not really surprising. I'm like, obviously you could make the benefit of the doubt that a normal person could survive this because Isaac is the main character, but for anyone else, yeah, I'm just kinda calling cap on that. So pretty much Kendra tries to leave us for dead again, but she dies horribly due to a giant tentacle monster. We fight said giant tentacle monster and then escape it, and after escaping the planet that literally gets blown up, we literally get jump scared by our dead girlfriend. So that was the first Dead Space game, everyone. It's a game which may be old, but damn it, it's still gold. And before I end off this video, I just want to say, if you ever want to check out the original Dead Space games, you can play them on two platforms, rather on the original consoles which they came out on, being the PS3 and the Xbox 360, or even through backwards compatibility on your Xbox One or Series X, or you could just play them on PC. But if there's another thing which I just want to talk about, I've heard about the remake changing some things, like the fact that the Ishimura is going to be fully explorable, the fact that characters like Hammond, Isaac, and Kendra are going to be expanded upon, and, you know, a few other things. And I'm just gonna say, even though I'm probably not gonna buy the remake because I already played the original game, I am gonna be interested to see about how they change the story now that Isaac can talk and now that other characters are being expanded upon, you know. But that's all I really gotta say, and I hope you all enjoyed this. Wait a minute, who the hell turned off the lights?